What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Monday episode of Addiction Recovery Hope and Resources. My name is Ty Empey, and I'm going to be your host today. And you guys, I am so excited about this episode. You have no idea. And before I introduce our guest, I'm gonna get a little personal right off the bat. So during the worst days of my addiction, I had lost a lot in my life. I ruined my marriage, lost a lot of money, lost jobs, places living, and everything. And during the worst part of my addiction, I ended up on felony probation. And it was basically where I had a probation officer that kind of oversaw everything going on with my court cases and everything. And it was something that I learned a lot from that experience. And in the beginning, it was kind of hard, having law enforcement have to step in and help me in my life when I was struggling. But looking back on it, I can now see how important it was for me in my life to have that piece to help me find recovery. And so for today, our guest is a supervisor at AP&P. His name is Justin Schelin. And for those of you who don't know, AP&P is a law enforcement agency here in the state of Utah, which stands for Adult Probation and Parole. So Justin's got a lot of things to tell us about. Today's going to be a good show. He's going to talk all about how, what AP&P is like and the role that they play and how they help people find recovery. So Justin, I'm super grateful that you're here today.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And let's jump right into it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what is AP&P?
Okay, Adult Probation Parole has several roles. One, we're looked at as a law enforcement agency in the state of Utah. Mm-hmm. That's not all we do. I'd like to say that we're just a law enforcement thing and hold people accountable, and that's all we do is just arrest people and put them in jail. Right. That's not what adult probation is. That's a very, very small part of our job, actually.
Okay.
We have several.
Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? So what are some of the things that, like, what are some of the responsibilities? What does it look like? How does the agencies work? Like I know you have agents, and so you're a supervisor. Kind of tell us a little bit about that. All the different things that you do and kind of how the agency works and things like that.
I am. I've been with the department now 17 years. Okay. So I've seen it evolve from the not so helpful side, shall we say, of probation to at this point where we're developing case action plans with an offender. Our main goal is to help them be successful on probation at this point. Mm-hmm. With the Justice Reinvestment Initiative that was introduced by the governor in 2015, mm-hmm. Adult Probation and Parole, part of the Department of Corrections, has really taken that on with the risk incentive matrix and risk levels to really form a plan of success for an offender. Mm-hmm. Every addict is different. Mm-hmm. You just are. Your lives are different. Your responsibilities are different in the community. You came up differently. Mm-hmm. Some have been victimized as children. Every life is different. Right. And so to have one general plan for anybody that's on probation doesn't necessarily work.
That makes sense.
So
just a minute ago, you mentioned a risk matrix and
Sure.
like a risk assessment. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. When someone is sentenced by a judge initially, mm-hmm. They can be sentenced to several things. They just fines and fees and paid to the court, which is called a bench probation. Mm-hmm. They can be placed on private probation, which is paid and slightly monitored, mm-hmm. Or they can be put on adult probation and parole, which is supervised probation, mm-hmm. and sentencing's range. When a new offense is committed, a judge will usually order a pre-sentence investigation report. Mm-hmm. When that report is done in its entirety by the investigator, the individual is assessed essentially about their risk level, their risk level to reoffend, what their criminal history looks like, what their family history looks like, education, what they're doing during their leisure time. All those things are taken into account and factored into a risk level. If they associate with known criminals and things like that, and their behavior leads us to believe that they're not being successful in their life or in active addiction, obviously their risk level is going to be higher. If they're in the community, they're involved in outreach, they're already in treatment themselves, they have a minimal criminal history, their risk level could be scored lower.
That makes sense.
So the level of supervision would also be lower. They would be required to do a few less things.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So what does that look like coming in? Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about some of the things that you want to share with us today?
Sure. So at the time of sentencing, a judge will order them to adult probation parole. The judge will have somebody given standard conditions. They need to report to the office. They can't have guns. They can't drink alcohol. They can't do drugs, those type of standard conditions. The judge may also end up giving them more of a specialized condition based on the charges that occurred, possibly substance abuse treatment, maybe fines and fees. Maybe they need to pay restitution given that they were in an accident or something occurred. Right. So they have both. If it comes to a point where they have so many of those charges and the offender or the individual is just not amenable to a supervision, adult probation parole doesn't have a lot of options at that point. We turn it back over to the court for an order to show cause based on violations that may have occurred. And at that point, the judge can either put them in jail for a period of time or actually revoke the probation that they're on and impose the original sentence, which means sending them to prison. The difference being if they're on supervised probation, they're still supervised by a court of law, and they end up going to jail. The other side is if the judge imposes the original sentence, now he loses jurisdiction because he sends them to prison where the Board of Pardons would have jurisdiction over them. Okay. So the jurisdiction changes. The supervision requirements aren't necessarily different, but the Board of Pardons operates a little differently than the courts do.
That makes sense.
People usually end up there at the prison for a little longer. The idea now is to transition those individuals with a lower risk level or a active drug addiction out into the community for the resources that they need, and that's what it's called, is this transition unit.
So it sounds like, let's say there's somebody out there and they commit an offense, they break a law, they end up having to go to court, whatever, and based on their past history with the courts or whatever, somewhere along the lines it's decided, okay, let's assess this person to see if they would be good to be supervised by adult probation and parole, which then if they meet the criteria, if they fall into that category, then they can come and they can be supervised by AP&P instead of going to prison initially or serving jail sentences or whatever. And so then when they come to you, then you guys have, your case action plans and things like that, and you kind of monitor them and refer them to treatment and things like that. And as long as they're compliant and they do all these things that you ask them to do, then they're good. But if they are not following it, then like you said, they would be recommended to prison, and then their jurisdiction gets handed over to the Board of Pardons, right? And the
individual would really have to work hard to get to prison.
Yeah.
Multiple abscondings, revokes, and restarts. It's not. We're not sending people to jail for using drugs or sending them to prison. Right. That's not what adult probation and parole is. We understand that you have lives. We understand that you have children, that you have a job, that you have a wife, that you have responsibilities out in the community, that you have a home. To throw you in jail an individual in jail for a period of time or send them to prison, they lose that resource in most cases. And so it's a continual cycle of recidivism. Instead of being successful on probation or parole, they go right back into it again. And that's the cycle that we're trying to break with those case action plans, is to develop a proper case action plan based on the highest 4 risk factors of an individual.
What are those?
And those are antisocial behavior, antisocial personality, antisocial cognition, and antisocial associates.
Gotcha.
So those are the biggest 4 reasons that recidivism happens. And I'm speaking to a community that knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Change is difficult.
Right.
Getting away from those associates is very hard, especially in smaller communities. Price and Vernal and areas that are just super tiny. It's hard to break that cycle and get away from the people that you know.
So it sounds like, I heard the word antisocial in that a lot. So it sounds like, I mean, some of your main goals is to help people, instead of being antisocial in the term of like not seeing people, you just want them to get connected to the right people and get connected into society the way that they should be, that's going to be healthy and support a better lifestyle without criminal behavior, right?
Exactly. So antisocial behavior is just behavior that harms others and a lack of empathy towards potential victims. Yeah. We're looking to change that behavior through modified approaches of evidence-based practice, cognitive behavioral treatment, and type classes that they can take, life skills, moral recognition therapy, different types of classes that they can take, whether that's at our office, which we have a treatment program called the Treatment Resource Center, or whether that's out in the community with some of our local providers like Southwest or Steps or Lionsgate or those that we refer to here locally that can do both an inpatient and an outpatient type of treatment program.
So let's talk about the TRC, the Treatment Resource Center that you just mentioned a minute ago. So what does that look like? So you mentioned that you have classes that people can take. Before you told me that you have a couple counselors out there. What does, I guess, what's the purpose of TRC? Like what does it look like for somebody to come and participate in the Treatment Resource Center that you guys have there at AP&P?
Well, prior to 2013, when you came out to probation and parole, you signed your probation agreement, and we basically said, go. Do your thing. Find it, get it, do it, whatever. And that's a little bit of how we approached treatment as a whole.
Yeah.
After 2013, our team entirely developed a treatment program. We had one agent and one therapist, and they were given the reins, and they said, go and develop a program. And by the way, it needs to work.
Yeah.
So we started treatment in the jail with groups and a few treatment classes there. That way, in jail where they're protected from the community a little bit, they don't have as many stressors. They still have them.
Right.
They could participate more freely in a correctional setting, and at least in some aspects. After that, they would transition right over into the Treatment Resource Center, which is at our office, where they would have continual individual and group sessions. They would also have more, if it was required, cognitive behavioral classes as well. And we developed all those classes. Our agents teach those classes. They're familiar with them. There are some classes that they need to be certified to teach, and they have those. And it was really, really successful, and it has been. If we can assess them properly at the time they're placed on probation, our office does those assessments with those therapists that are there, and those treatment recommendations can vary from no treatment recommended to IOP, which we have, but we're limited at our office. We don't have the inpatient treatment that some people have to have. We also are limited in our ability, although we can assess for mental health, we can't necessarily treat it at our office. So they may have a dual diagnosis that we may need to refer out to another agency like Southwest.
Gotcha.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I wanted you to talk about that for a minute, because a minute ago you said that, based on your assessments and things like that, sometimes you do refer them to outside agencies or companies in the community like Southwest, Steps, Lionsgate, places like that. What does that look like, and why? I guess, like, how long have you been referring people out, and how does that work? Does it help? Like, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we've always referred people out. Obviously, prior to 2013, that's all you did. That was it. And it was just go find it out in the community. After 2013, once we had the program in place, there were things that we could do, and there were things that we just couldn't. People just needed that higher level of care, whether that was that inpatient portion, and getting them out of the community because they just couldn't stop.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And addiction's hard. I'm not an addict myself. I was in the treatment resource center for 5 years, but I understand addiction. Yeah. I've taught it. Oh, yeah. I understand it. I know what you feel. I know that you're afraid, that you're embarrassed. I know that you feel anxiety, that you're stressed, that my coping skills aren't necessarily right. And
so you've been around it enough and you've dealt with so many people that you've seen it, you've seen how it affects people's lives and whatnot. We've got about 7.5 minutes left. I know that there's lots of other stuff that I want to hear from you. Tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned case action plans, or what are some other things that you've got going on out at AP&P?
Sure. So case action plans are developed at the time an individual's placed on probation based on their risk level. If they're higher than a risk level, then they're going to have obviously something more critical that they need to comply with on probation. So what we have at the very, very top is we have what's called goals and milestones.
Okay.
The goal is an overarching goal. If they were sentenced to prison, that case action plan will follow them out on the street and back out to us where we would supervise them. That goal remains the same. If the Board of Pardons issues that condition that they need to complete substance abuse treatment, that's the goal. That's the overarching goal. Now they have a milestone underneath that. And milestones are major accomplishments. Getting a substance abuse evaluation, being clean for so long, those types of things are major milestones that have been accomplished under that goal until the goal is completed. Okay. Then you have even more minor steps, and these are the name eludes me at the moment, but
no worries.
They're called action steps. Sorry, apologize. So even more minor. Did you come into the office today? Did you respond to the text or call from your agent?
Are you doing what you're supposed to?
Yeah, I mean, there's simply steps to get to the ultimate goal of completing that treatment or whatever the goal is, and to do it successfully. That doesn't mean there's not going to be slip ups or things that maybe you didn't do your best this time or whatever, but our ultimate goal is to help individuals be successful. Yeah. I don't want them to be successful on probation. Yeah. I want them to be successful in their life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I want them to learn how to cope, how to deal with the stressors, how to deal with an ex-wife or a blended family or kids or a job that maybe isn't providing them the financial security that they need, or there's just so many stressors out there.
I think that all too often people people that struggle with addiction, people that are involved in the criminal justice system, even like people generally in the public, all too often, all they see and all they hear about is the punitive side of what you guys do, and how, oh, I've got this PO and he wants to send me to jail or whatever. But in reality, you guys have this whole system within your agency about, you were telling me about goals and rewards and these case action plans, and you really are just trying to help people, like you said, get your life back together, right?
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What are your thoughts there as far as like the punitive side versus the like helping side?
So there's an incentives rewards matrix. If an individual is placed on probation for 36 months, one of the rewards or incentives is that they could possibly be off early in 18 months, provided that the conditions of probation have been met. For higher restitution cases, that's sometimes impossible. But in cases like that, the judge can reward them by converting them back to bench probation to allow them to pay the fee instead of being supervised and paying that extra fee to adult probation and parole. So kind of a reward, and it's a graduated rewards incentive matrix. There are things that the judge has to approve of. There are things that adult probation and parole can approve of, like community service break, things like that we can reward somebody for, recommending a fine reduction, things like that, even to the agent level, where the agent can recommend that they be given a break, like a community service reduction, verbal recognition for a job well done, certificates for completion of certain things.
So I just want to say this, because we're getting close to a couple minutes left. I just want to add this. I'm really grateful that you came on today, because having a probation officer really, I mean, it literally changed my life. I just want to add my like personal story to everything that you're saying, because I went through the treatment resource center. I had a probation officer that, he had to violate me and send me to jail a couple times because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to. And when the treatment resource center, when I wasn't following, the rules and recommendations that counselors were saying, my probation officer made me like call out to other treatment centers out in the community, and he helped me get into treatment and get the help that I needed. So I'm very grateful for the role that AP&P plays. We've got about a minute and a half left, and so Justin, what are your final thoughts? What can you leave the listeners and the viewers with? Give us a little bit of hope.
Man, don't get discouraged. I know that addiction is a hard thing to overcome, and it doesn't matter what type of addiction it is: alcohol, drugs, sexual addiction, being a victim of abuse, any type of victimization or addiction. It is hard to come from. Keep your head up. Look for those resources. There are people that are out there that are willing to support you and help you succeed. And that includes adult probation and parole. There are many success stories that I have. There are some failures that I have with individuals. It comes down to choice. And everybody's bottom is different. And you may think you hit it, and then you hit another one, and then another one. Get back up. Get back up. There is always a hand.
I love how you said it all comes down to choice, because when I first was on AP&P, I just butted heads, and I chose not to be willing to buy in, but eventually, after you guys helped me quite a bit, it really helped me turn my life around, and I'm grateful for you coming on today. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.